Hey, my name is Jen. Let's get started.
I have destroyed 17 fleets. Not defeated, not scattered, destroyed. I want you to understand what that means before we continue, because context matters when you are trying to make sense of what happened to me, what the humans did to me, and why I am now sitting in a cell on their station dictating this report into a recorder, that one of them brought me along with something they call coffee and a blanket, because, and I quote, "You looked cold." I was not cold. I am Vethkar. We do not get cold, but I accepted the blanket anyway. That right there should tell you everything about how dangerous these creatures are, and if it does not, then strap in, because this is going to be a very uncomfortable story for everyone involved, especially me. My name is Grand Commander Serathul of the Vethkar Dominion, Third Claw of the High Council, decorated veteran of the Kalos Suppression, the Rim War, the Silence at Duran 7, and approximately 49 other military operations that I am not allowed to name in an open record. I have served the Dominion for 60 years. I have never lost a campaign, until the humans, although, and I need to be precise about this because precision is one of the few things I have left, I am not entirely certain that I lost. That is the problem. That is the entire maddening, sleep-destroying problem with the humans. You cannot tell if you are losing. It started at Korath Station, a supply depot, technically neutral, located at the junction of 3 contested trade lanes. The humans had been pushing into our outer sectors for 8 months, slow and methodical, not with the explosive aggression you would expect from a species that had already destroyed 2 of our patrol fleets, but with the careful, almost reluctant advance of someone who keeps stopping to help people along the way, which they literally were doing. Our intelligence reports, and I reviewed these personally, multiple times, because I assumed there was a translation error, indicated that as the human fleet moved through the Duran corridor, they had stopped at a Vethkar colony called Thres Minor. Thres Minor had been damaged in a previous engagement, not by the humans, by us actually, a miscalculated strike during a tactical retreat that I had personally authorized. The colony had lost its atmospheric processors. The Vethkar civilians there, approximately 40,000 of them, had maybe 3 weeks before conditions became unsuitable for habitation. The humans stopped their military advance for 11 days. 11 days. They repaired the atmospheric processors, they provided medical assistance, they left food supplies, they posted a small security force to protect the colony from pirates, because apparently even in the middle of fighting us, the humans were worried about third-party opportunists causing harm to our civilians. Then they continued their advance. I read that report 4 times. I called my intelligence officer, a competent analyst named Drev, and I asked him if there was any strategic reason the humans might want Thres Minor intact, perhaps a future staging ground, a communications relay. Drev checked. Thres Minor had nothing of strategic value. It was a farming colony. Then why, I asked him, very slowly, did they spend 11 days fixing it? Drev looked at me with the expression of someone who very much did not want to answer. Then he said, "Sir, the human captain left a message with the colony administrator. It said, and I translated this carefully, it said, 'Nobody asked for this war. That includes your people. Stay safe.'" I dismissed Drev. Then I sat alone in my command chamber for a very long time. Nobody asked for this war. I had started this war. I had signed the initial engagement order myself, in response to a human survey vessel that had crossed into Dominion territory without proper clearance. A textbook act of aggression under Vethkar law. I had responded with overwhelming appropriate force. The survey vessel had apparently been lost and running on backup navigation systems. I did not know that at the time. The humans knew I did not know. And they had still, after I destroyed their vessel, after we exchanged 6 months of increasingly violent escalation, after I personally ordered the destruction of a human communications relay that turned out to also be carrying a civilian crew, they had still stopped to fix our farming colony. I made a note in my command log, human compassion, possible strategic manipulation, investigate. What I should have written was, I am already losing and I do not know it yet. We met at Korath Station 2 weeks later. I had assembled what any objective military analyst would call an overwhelming force, 4 cruiser wings, 2 carrier groups, a siege complement, and enough support vessels to maintain the campaign for a year without resupply. I had chosen Korath specifically because its position allowed me to cut the human advance into 3 isolated segments, destroy each one independently, and push them back to their own border in a single decisive campaign. The plan was excellent. I am not being modest. It was, objectively, an excellent plan. The humans executed their half of the plan completely wrong, which I understand now was not incompetence. Their fleet arrived smaller than projected. Not because they had been weakened, I learned later they had simply not brought everything, but because they had detached a significant portion of their forces too. And I want you to appreciate how absurd this sounds in a military context, to evacuate a Vethkar border station that had been caught in the predicted combat zone. They had looked at my tactical projections somehow, and I still do not know how. They had an extremely accurate model of my strategy, and identified 3 stations in the likely engagement corridor where Vethkar civilians would be at risk. So they sent ships to move those civilians before the battle started. Warning ships. They sent warning ships to our own people, telling them to evacuate before a battle that was supposed to be a surprise engagement that I had not told anyone about, including those civilians. By the time I realized what was happening, 17,000 Vethkar civilians had been transported to safety aboard human vessels and deposited at the nearest neutral station with full supplies, personal effects, and a written apology from the human admiral that I later obtained and read 3 times because I could not believe it was real. The apology said, "We are sorry for the disruption to your lives. This conflict was not your choice, and its consequences should not fall on you. You will be contacted regarding the return of any property left behind." I want to be very clear about my emotional state at this point. I was furious. I was furious because this was obviously a strategy. It had to be a strategy. No military force operating in active conflict zones redirected resources to protect enemy civilians unless there was a calculated reason. The humans were manufacturing goodwill. They were poisoning the loyalty of Vethkar citizens to the Dominion by making themselves appear benevolent. It was psychological warfare of the most sophisticated kind, and I was not going to fall for it. I ordered the engagement to commence. The Battle of Korath Station lasted 19 hours. I do not want to go into extensive detail, because the tactical specifics are not the point, but I will say that the humans fought the way I imagine a person fights when they genuinely do not want to hurt anyone, but are also absolutely not going to lose. There is a particular quality to that kind of combat that I had never encountered before. Vethkar warriors fight to destroy. Most species we have encountered fight to survive. The humans fought to... They targeted propulsion. They targeted weapons systems. They did not target life support. I noticed this in the first 3 hours and assumed it was a coincidence or a limitation in their weapons systems. By hour 7, when they had disabled 4 of my cruisers without destroying a single one, I realized it was intentional. They were fighting a whole battle designed to leave my people alive. I lost Korath Station. Technically, they controlled the junction by the time we negotiated a disengagement, but I had lost 40% of my fleet's combat capability and 0% of my personnel. Everyone was alive. Everyone had been offered medical assistance and declined out of pride, and the humans had respected that without comment. After the disengagement, a communication came through on a channel I had not given them, which means they had broken at least part of my encryption, which I was also furious about. The human admiral's face appeared on my screen. She looked tired, not triumphant. Tired, the way someone looks after doing something difficult that they had not wanted to do. "Grand Commander," she said, "I imagine you're angry. You have excellent observational skills for someone who should be celebrating a victory," I said. Something crossed her face. Not quite a smile. Something more complicated. "This isn't how we wanted this to go," she said. "The survey vessel that started this, we know about the navigation failure. We know you didn't have that information. We are not your enemies, Commander. We were never trying to be. You just destroyed my station. You started destroying our ships 8 months ago," she said. "We responded. We tried to limit the harm. We failed at that, and I'm sorry." A pause. "I'm genuinely sorry." I closed the channel. Then I sat in my command chamber for a very long time again. My second officer, Preth, came in after an hour. Preth has served with me for 20 years. He has seen me in every kind of battle, every kind of crisis. He looked at me with what I can only describe as concern, which was unusual enough that I noticed it. "Commander," he said carefully, "the crew is waiting for tactical orders." "I know. The Korath withdrawal will need a formal report." "I know that too, sir." He stopped. Then, lower. "The humans, when they evacuated the border stations, 3 of those stations, the people they moved. My family is from one of those stations." I looked at him. "My sister was there," he said. "She sent me a message. She said the humans were kind, that they helped her with her children, that they kept apologizing." I did not say anything. "Sir," Preth said, I do not know what to do with that. Neither do I told him. It was the most honest thing I had said in months. I filed my report to the High Council with careful, precise language. I described the tactical situation accurately. I described the human behavior accurately. I recommended a strategic reassessment. What I did not include, because I did not yet have the words for it, was the thing that was actually happening to me. I had spent 60 years in military service operating on a foundational assumption that every commander operates on, that conflict is a zero-sum transaction, that compassion is a liability, that the objective is victory, and victory means the destruction of the opposing force's capacity and will to continue. The humans were doing something to my will, not through fear, not through superior firepower, though they had that, not through propaganda, though that was my working theory. They were doing it by being, and I recognize how this sounds, I recognize it completely, by being decent. Every engagement, every interaction, every decision they made in a situation where they could have chosen destruction and chose something else instead. They were building a case, not in my mind, somewhere worse, in my chest. I am Vethkar. We are not known for sentiment. We do not have a cultural tradition of emotional complexity the way humans apparently do. We have loyalty, honor, duty, and strategic clarity. These are sufficient. These have always been sufficient. But I kept thinking about the colony administrator at Thres Minor, who had sent me a private message, unauthorized, desperate, probably expecting punishment, saying that the humans had worked alongside her people for 11 days, and that one of their engineers had spent an entire night recalibrating a secondary processor because a Vethkar child had asked him why the lights kept flickering. The child had asked him why the lights kept flickering, and the human had spent the night fixing it, not because it was strategically important, not because anyone was watching, because a child had asked. I am trying to explain to you what that does to an enemy. I do not think you understand, even now, what a weapon that is. A child asks why the lights flicker. An enemy soldier spends the night making sure they do not flicker anymore. And somewhere in the vast cold machinery of military conflict, something small and irreversible shifts. You stop seeing an enemy. You start seeing a person. And once you have done that, once that has happened to you, the war becomes the strangest, most uncomfortable thing you have ever tried to keep doing. 3 weeks after Korath, I received orders from the High Council. They wanted an escalation, more forces, a harder push, reclaim Korath, push the humans back to their original border, establish a buffer zone that would prevent further incursion. I prepared the orders for my fleet. I looked at them for a long time. My second officer Preth came in again. He had been doing that a lot lately. I had not told him to stop. The new orders, I said. We will advance on Korath. Yes, sir. The human fleet will be there. Intelligence suggests yes. They will try to limit casualties again, I said. They will try to end the engagement without destroying us. Pretos was quiet for a moment. Probably, sir. And then, I said, they will apologize. Preth said nothing, but something in his posture, some military straightness that I had known for 20 years, seemed to carry the weight of a question he was not asking. I issued the advance orders, and I spent the entire journey to Korath trying to remember why. There is a particular kind of silence that exists on a warship before battle. I know this silence well. I have lived inside it for 60 years. It is not peaceful. It is not the silence of rest or calm or acceptance. It is the silence of 1,000 beings holding their breath simultaneously, each one running private calculations about survival, about duty, about what comes after. It has a texture to it, a weight. The silence on my ship as we approached Korath the second time felt different. I noticed it the way you notice a familiar room that someone has rearranged while you were sleeping. Everything is where it should be. Nothing is obviously wrong, but something is obvious, and you cannot stop looking around trying to identify what changed. What changed was my crew, not their professionalism, not their discipline. They were Vethkar soldiers, and they performed their functions with the precision I had trained into them over years of shared campaign. But there was something missing from the silence this time, something I could only identify by its absence. Hunger. Vethkar soldiers going into battle are hungry, not for food, for resolution, for the clean, violent conclusion that military conflict is supposed to produce, the moment where the outcome becomes clear and the uncertainty collapses into either victory or death, both of which are in their own way a relief. My crew was not hungry. My crew was uncertain, which is different and much more dangerous, because uncertainty does not resolve into action. Uncertainty folds back on itself. It asks questions, and soldiers who are asking questions in the middle of a combat approach are soldiers who are half somewhere else, which means they are half useless, which means people die. People die for the wrong reasons. I stood at the command display, and I looked at my crew, and I understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that the humans had already done something to them that I had been too proud to notice was happening to me. Pret appeared at my side without being summoned. He had developed this habit since Korath, this quiet gravitating toward my position during tense moments, and I had not corrected it because, and I acknowledged this to myself with some discomfort, I found it useful. He was a steady presence. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He simply stood there and thought alongside me, which was, I realized, a remarkably human way to offer support. I was going to have to examine that observation later, when I had time to be disturbed by it. The human fleet is positioned as projected, Preth said. 4 carrier groups, 2 cruiser wings, support complement consistent with a defensive posture. Defensive, I said. Yes, sir. They are not advancing. They are waiting. I studied the display. The human formation was textbook defensive geometry, optimized for absorbing an attack rather than initiating one. They had positioned themselves between my approach vector and Korath station, which meant they were protecting the station rather than using it as a base of operations. They think we want the station back, I said. Don't we, sir? I did not answer immediately. What is currently at Korath station? Pret checked his information. A pause. Sir, since the engagement 3 weeks ago, the humans have established a refugee processing center at Korath, Vethkar displaced by the corridor fighting. Approximately 31,000 individuals. They have also taken in a smaller number from 2 other species caught in the conflict zone. Another pause, longer. They have been transmitting open requests for humanitarian aid from neutral parties, medical supplies, food, construction materials. For our people, yes sir, on a station they control. Yes sir. I looked at the human fleet sitting patiently between me and a station where 31,000 of my people were being housed and fed by my enemy, and I felt the entire strategic architecture of this campaign shift under my feet, like ground that had been quietly becoming something else for months. They knew we would come back, I said. Almost certainly, sir. They set up the refugee center knowing it would complicate any second assault. That would be the cynical interpretation, Preth said carefully. What is the other interpretation? He was quiet for a moment, that they genuinely needed somewhere to put 31,000 displaced people, and Korath was the most practical option, and the fact that it complicates our assault is not the reason they did it, but simply an additional consequence. I turned to look at him. You have been thinking about this. I have had 3 weeks, sir, and you believe the second interpretation. Preeth met my eyes. He was 20 years my subordinate. He had followed me into 17 engagements, across 4 sectors, through a career defined by absolute certainty in the Vethkar way of war. He looked at me now with an expression I had never seen on him before, something complicated and tired and almost apologetic. Sir, he said, my sister sent another message. I waited. She says the human medical staff at the processing center has been teaching Vethkar children to play a game, a human game. She says her youngest cannot stop talking about a human engineer named Dav, who showed him how to build small structures from scraps. A breath. She says he asks every day if the humans are going to have to leave. The bridge was very quiet. He is 6 years old, Preth said. He is asking if the humans have to leave. A communication request came through before I had formulated my next order. Human fleet, Admiral Chen, the same tired face I had closed a channel on 3 weeks ago. I accepted it. She looked at me across the distance between our flagships, and she did not look triumphant, and she did not look strategic, and she did not look like someone executing a carefully designed psychological operation. She looked like a person who was very tired of something, and very much wanted it to stop. Commander Serathul, she said, you came back. Did you expect otherwise? Honestly? A pause. No. Your High Council wouldn't let you not come back. That's not a criticism. I understand institutional pressure. She glanced to one side, as if checking something, then back. I want to show you something before we do whatever we're about to do. My communications officer looked at me. I gave a minimal gesture of permission. The channels split. One half still showed Admiral Chen. The other half showed a live feed from inside Korath Station, and I looked at it, and I made myself look at it, because looking away would have been a kind of cowardice I did not want to practice. Korath Station's primary hall had been converted. The functional military infrastructure was still there, visible in the architecture, but the space had been transformed in the way that spaces transform when a large number of people have been living in them for 3 weeks. There were personal effects arranged along the walls. Children had drawn on surfaces that could be cleaned later. A group of elderly Vethkar were seated in a circle near the far wall, and 2 humans were seated among them, and someone was telling a story, and the humans were listening. They were listening to a story told by elderly Vethkar displaced by a war that the humans were a party to, and they were listening with the specific quality of attention that communicates, "What you are saying matters to me." "We have 47 medical staff currently on the station," Admiral Chen said quietly over the feed. "We have 3 engineers running infrastructure. We have rotating security keeping the area clear of opportunists. We have been doing this for 3 weeks. I watched a human child, I had not known they had children aboard, which was its own revelation, cross the hall and sit down next to a Vethkar child approximately the same physical size and begin, apparently without preamble or negotiation, to show the Vethkar child something on a small handheld device. The Vethkar child leaned in to look. "Why?" I said. My voice came out sounding strange. "Why do you keep doing this?" Admiral Chen looked at me for a long moment. "Because they're people," she said, as if this were the most obvious answer to the most obvious question, as if I had asked her why water was wet, or why the stars did not fall. "Because they are people. I have killed people. I want to be clear about that. I have issued orders that resulted in the deaths of many people across many campaigns, and I have done so with the full conviction of military necessity, with the armor of institutional duty and species loyalty and strategic imperative. I have done it, and not apologized, and not looked back, because that is what commanders do, and the armor has never failed me before." Somewhere in the hours between leaving my home system and arriving at Korath the second time, the armor had developed a crack. I was looking through the crack now, at a Vethkar child leaning in to look at something a human child was showing her, and the crack was getting wider, and I was not certain I had the tools to repair it. "I have orders," I told Admiral Chen. "I cannot simply turn my fleet around." "I know," she said. "My High Council wants Korath reclaimed. I know that too. They will not accept a negotiated withdrawal. They will not accept another strategic reassessment." I paused. "They want a demonstration that the Dominion does not yield to human military pressure." "I understand," she said, and then carefully, "What do you want, Commander?" Nobody had asked me that. In 60 years of military service, through 17 fleet actions and 4 full campaigns, through council meetings and command briefings and tactical assessments and formal reviews, nobody had ever, in the context of an active military decision, asked me what I wanted. I did not have an answer ready, because I had never needed one. "I want," I said slowly, "to understand what you are doing." Chen tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, all of it. The civilians, the prisoners who are treated as guests, the repairs to our infrastructure, the medical care, the children sitting together on my station that you control." I gestured toward the feed that was still running. "What is this? What is the strategy? What do you want from us?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something that I have been turning over in my mind ever since, something that I wrote down afterward because I did not trust my memory to preserve it accurately. She said, "Commander, we don't want anything from you. We want to stop fighting. We want the people on both sides of this to go home and not be afraid anymore. We don't have a territory goal. We don't need your resources. We definitely don't need more conflict." She leaned forward slightly. "The survey ship that started this, we should have communicated better. You didn't have the information you needed and you made a reasonable decision with what you had." We responded. "It escalated. People died on both sides, and I am genuinely sorry for the ones we killed, and I imagine you carry the weight of the ones who died on your side, and none of them needed to die." She stopped. Then quieter. "We keep doing what you're describing because it's the right thing to do, and because we are hoping, very sincerely, that at some point you will believe us." Believe them. I gave the order to hold position, not withdraw, not advance, hold. My tactical officers looked at me with the careful neutrality of people who were deeply uncertain but too disciplined to say so. Prethus said nothing. I could feel him not saying things with considerable intensity. I opened a private channel to Admiral Chen and I said, "I need 48 hours. "Okay," she said immediately. "No negotiation, no conditions. I need to transmit to my High Council." "Of course. They will probably order me to advance regardless." "Probably," she agreed. "I am going to recommend against it." I paused. "I want to be transparent with you about that, because I believe you have been transparent with me, and I find that I am unable to respond to transparency with deception. I do not entirely know what to do with that." Something genuine moved across her face then. Not triumph, not relief. Something warmer and more complicated, something that I later learned humans call being moved, which is apparently what happens when something touches a feeling they did not expect to be touched. "Thank you, Commander," she said. The High Council transmission took 3 hours to reach the relevant members and return a response. The response was not warm. I was reminded of my duties. I was reminded of the strategic objectives. I was reminded that the Dominion does not negotiate from a position of military hesitation, and that my request for reassessment had already been reviewed once and denied. I was told to advance or face a formal review of my command fitness. I sat with that for a long time. Then I did something I had never done in 60 years of service. I transmitted back to the High Council, formally and on record, my professional assessment that the current campaign objectives were unachievable through military means, that continued engagement would produce no strategic gain, and that I was recommending immediate ceasefire negotiations, and that if the Council chose to relieve me of command over this recommendation, I would accept that with full understanding, but that I could not in good conscience advance on a station containing 31,000 Vethkar civilians being cared for by the enemy we were advancing on. I sent it. Then I sat back and waited to be court-martialed. What happened instead surprised me. My transmission to the Council had not been private. The encryption was standard, but I am going to assume this was intentional, though Preti maintains to this day it was a technical accident, transmitted on a frequency that was audible to a significant portion of my fleet's internal communications network. My officers had heard it. My crew had heard it. Within 6 hours I had received formal messages of support from 11 of my 14 senior officers, and an informal communication from an unknown crew member that simply said, "Sir, we all have families on those stations, thank you." Within 36 hours, 2 other Vethkar commanders operating in adjacent sectors had transmitted their own requests for strategic reassessment to the Council, citing my report and their own field observations. Within 72 hours, 3 Vethkar colony administrators had published open statements expressing their experiences with human forces during the Corridor campaign. One of them was the administrator from Thres Minor. I want to be careful here about how I explain the next part, because I have seen it mischaracterized as a strategic victory for humanity, a demonstration of superior soft power, a calculated long game that the humans were running from the beginning. I asked Admiral Chen directly, later, in the first formal negotiation session, which she attended in person on a neutral station, and I attended in person because she had asked, and I found that I could not refuse her in good ways anymore. I asked, was this the plan? Was any of this calculated? She thought about it for a long moment. The way I have come to understand humans think about things they want to answer honestly, even when honesty is complicated. "The tactics were real," she said. "We genuinely tried to limit harm. We genuinely ran the refugee center. The people who helped your civilians genuinely wanted to help them." She paused. "Is that the same as a plan? I don't know. We were taught, all of us, from the beginning. That's how you do things. You don't stop being decent because it's inconvenient. You don't stop seeing people because they're the enemy." She met my eyes. "I guess we trusted that it would matter. We hoped it would. We didn't know." She did not know. They had not known. They had simply kept being what they were. Across every engagement, under every pressure, in every circumstance where it would have been easier and more strategically efficient to be something harder and colder, and more like what every other species in this galaxy had taught us military conflict looks like. And the thing they were had turned out to be the most destabilizing force I had encountered in 60 years of war. I am writing this from a room that the humans have given me on the neutral station where negotiations are ongoing. I have accepted the room. I have accepted the coffee, which I have developed a complicated relationship with. I have accepted the blanket. My court-martial is technically still pending. The High Council is in the middle of its own internal crisis. 3 factions now openly debating the handling of the human conflict, the Thres Minor administrator's statement still circulating through Vethkar civic networks with an intensity that the Council did not anticipate and cannot easily manage. I do not know how this ends politically. I am a military commander, not a diplomat, and the political architecture of what comes next is above my clearance and outside my competence. But I know what I have learned. You cannot fight people who refuse to stop seeing you as a person. You cannot sustain the machinery of hatred against an enemy that keeps, quietly and persistently, and without apparent strategic calculation, treating your people as if they matter. War requires a particular kind of vision, a narrowing of perception that makes the enemy into something you can target without cost to yourself. The humans kept ruining that vision. Every act of decency was a small act of destruction against the war itself, not against us, against the conflict that required us to be abstractions to each other. They won because they kept refusing to let us be abstractions. And one by one, battle by battle, colony by colony, child by child, asking why the lights were flickering, they dismantled the war from the inside, not with weapons, with the oldest and most underrated force in any conflict, anywhere, across any species that has ever had the capacity to decide who counts as a person. They simply never stopped deciding that we did. A Vethkar elder from the Korath Refugee Center sent me a personal message this morning. She said she wanted me to know that the humans had helped her recover a piece of family documentation she had believed lost in the corridor fighting. She said a human archivist had spent 2 weeks reconstructing it from partial records because she had mentioned, in passing, that it mattered to her. She said, "I wanted you to know, Commander, because I understand you are the one making decisions. I wanted you to know what they are." I read it 3 times. Then I went to the negotiation table, sat across from Admiral Chen, and said, "Let us talk about how to end this in a way that everyone survives." She smiled, and it was tired and genuine and not triumphant at all. "We were hoping you'd say that," she said, and somehow, impossibly, after everything, I believed her.
Nobody warned the Vethkar Dominion about humanity's most dangerous weapon. Not their ships, not their soldiers, not their tactics. Their habits of caring about people who were actively trying to destroy them. Grand Commander Srathul spent 60 years building an undefeated record and lost it to a blanket, a cup of coffee, and an engineer who stayed up all night fixing lights because a 6-year-old asked him to. 60 years, 17 fleet, one child asking one question. The Dominion never recorded honestly, neither did Srathul. Smart man too, he accepted the blanket. Subscribe, you know what to do.